Hey nerds, we are going over the most recent episode of X-Men 97, starting now. Welcome to the Nerd Social. I am Colin.
And I'm Nathan.
David's on vacation right now, so we're very glad to have Nathan here to talk about the most recent episode of X-Men 97. This is now episode 6, titled Life-Death-Part 2. And so the spoil-free logline is that Storm is forced to face her worst fears in order to free herself. Nathan, I want to hear what you have to say about this most recent episode.
I think it was pretty good. It's hard to top last week's episode, and also, I guess you don't necessarily want to. You want to give the audience a breather. But yeah, I think last week was probably the best of the season so far. If you follow social media of Mayo, there will be some more extreme things coming up in the next couple weeks, so it didn't reach those heights. It was a very solid episode. There was a bit of a surprise. I didn't expect to see some people that I did see, because the day before they also released a clip spoiling that these people were going to show up, whereas the text description that we got for the episode was just about Storm, and so it ended up being split between Storm and the other people we didn't know that were going to show up. So that was interesting. I think it took away from Storm's story. I was actually looking forward to the entire half an hour being about Storm, which means it wasn't as developed as it was in the comics. But I think it still was a solid representation of the story. And the comics went on for like several issues. And there are definitely details in the comic story of Life Death that I think were rushed through. You didn't really get to see the development of their romance as much as I would have liked.
Right.
But besides that nitpick, it was good. And also, the adversary does far more crazy things in the comics. I think it was a good little arc for Storm, starting from episode 2 when she lost her powers.
Yep.
And culminating with this episode.
Yeah, for me, definitely a good follow-up to the big episode last week. I think, like you said, there's a lot of episodes that we've seen in the past in our reviews that after there was a big event that happens, the episode afterwards is not that good. And I was very surprised to find out that this episode was actually pretty good. And I was questioning why they did episode 4 and then now episode 6 being Life-Death-Part 2. Like, why did they do that? And I can understand, because when we get to spoilers, you can figure out why that was the case. And so it made a lot of sense. And also the story, yes, you're right, Nathan, was very good in terms of telling a 2-part story. And yes, I felt that they should have put more effort, more time into the Storm part of the story. But in any case, it was nice to see the outer space part as well, because we haven't seen that since the original series with the Phoenix Saga. In that case, it was a good introduction to all the different types of characters that were there. But yeah, definitely it's not going to top anything that's going to happen last week.
Yeah, I still think that even though I wasn't expecting an A and a B plot, and I don't even know if it was necessarily an A and a B plot, because usually when you have an A and a B plot, the B plot is less important than the A plot, and I can't tell which was supposed to be less important. I guess the name of the episode is Life Death. I guess Storm is more important.
Right.
Her story is not the first thing that you see, though.
Exactly.
So there's that. But yeah, I think that the themes, and we can talk about this when we get into the spoiler discussion, the themes in both of the stories tie together well. There's talk about certain things that come up in both stories, and I think that goes back to Mayo and the things that you attend to because of your life experiences. He, as a Black gay man, are going to focus in on some things and some specifics that I think another writer might not, even though another writer knows that this is supposed to be a metaphor for discrimination. Not having actually experienced a lot of discrimination means that you might not get the specificities, right. And there are specifics in this episode that I think I haven't seen discussed whenever the X-Men have been put into mass media. In the original show, partially because it was a cartoon for children, and but we haven't seen this level of sophistication in any of the 13 movies either. Yeah.
All right. So in terms of rating, what do you think you're going to give episode 6?
So I was going to give it a 7, but I think that there are certain points in it, and we'll get to that bring it up to an 8 for me, a road trip. So I think I'm going to give it a road trip. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. For me, I was teetering between 7 and 8, and I think that because of the guest spots, I love introducing new characters. That's just my thing, and because of that, I give it an 8. And also, it was a nice type of comparison for some characters that we saw in the previews. And you're like, oh, I can compare that to the MCU in some ways. So we're going to dive into that as we get to spoiler. Any other thoughts before we do that?
No, I think she should get into it because it's impossible to talk about certain things without spoiling it. Yeah.
Okay. So if you like what we have to say about X-Men 97 and other content like ours, please share, subscribe so it can help out in our algorithm. So spoilers ahead. Okay, let's get right to it. So we can see here that the opening scene, like you said, Nathan, was in outer space, and we see the Shi'ar Empire. The last time we saw them was in the Phoenix Saga, and also the last episode of X-Men.
The very last
episode with Lilandra, and we see them in a war with the Kree, and we know that the Kree and the Skrull were at war with each other for a while, but this is going back to the 90s where the Shi'ar and Kree were at war, and I would assume that's probably because it's a different universe. They're probably going to do some different things than what we know about in the MCU. So go ahead.
The Kree are almost as militaristic as the Shi'ar, so it's possible that they just have a two-front war. It's possible. They're also fighting with the Skrulls.
Yeah. In this particular shot, we see Gladiator from the original series, and also this is Deathbird, who is the sister of Lilandra. Her family is so crazy. And she's the one that's like the normal sane one in some ways. And she has some questionable decisions too.
She's like the normal sane one-ish. I feel like they have a psychic connection. But she's also the empress of an empire, and as Charles makes clear later on, that's not necessarily a good thing. There are a lot of things that she's been born into that she hasn't questioned. Yeah, she's, as despots go, she's okay, I
guess. Definitely. And then we see another shot of the Kree. This is Ronan the Accuser, so it's a little bit of a different design than what are used to from Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel.
It's a design that shrieks to the comics, though. He's usually in green. I don't know if they could have made this work because it is a bright yellow, but they probably could have put him in green. There was no reason to put him in like black in the movie, but
yeah. And also the Supreme Intelligence was name dropped in this episode, but we didn't get to see Supreme Intelligence. But it was nice to see all these different characters from the Shi'ar and the Kree.
We didn't, but we did see most recently in MCU canon, but we did see the Supreme Intelligence during the Phoenix Saga of this show, because the Shi'ar checks with the Supreme Intelligence said object to this fight. Lilandra calls Supreme Intelligence during that episode.
So, yes, you're right. It was like part 4. And then we see Xavier for the first time in this series walking and actually in his body armor, and seems as though his illness is cured by the Shi'ar technology and Lilandra. In this scene, Lilandra is professing her love for Xavier and telling it to her audience that they're about to be wed. It causes a very big reaction of all the people that are there, especially the advisors and all those people that are close to Lilandra. And does Deathbird interrupt this gathering?
No, I think it's a little bit later.
Okay.
So this is technically the first time we've seen Charles for real in the 97 series, but we did see him in the first episode when Morph pretended to be him. And of course, he's been on the wall every time they pan over to the original X-Men as well.
Yeah, which was surprising because in the intro cards, they did not show his intro card, but then it was kind of...
They showed his intro card in the first episode.
Right.
And then subsequent episodes they took it away and they added Magneto, and then Magneto we didn't really talk about the very beginning.
You can do that.
Yeah, Magneto's missing from this one, so is Gambit. It was brutal.
Yeah,
and they added Nightcrawler. So.
Yes, David would be very happy about that because he mentioned in the last review that he loves Nightcrawlers. But we don't see Nightcrawler here in this episode. Then we switch to the other storyline in this episode, which is with Forge. And I didn't have screenshots in which Forge was bitten by the adversary and this growth that's appearing.
This happened at the end of episode 4. There are more gnarly screenshots of that now in this episode because it's getting worse. But yeah, he got bit. She's talking to the adversary, and the adversary is telling her to leave him.
Yeah, and I didn't mention this back in episode 4, where I thought that the love story was rushed And I think that speaks to what you're saying, Nathan, about how in the comics it was more drawn out. And I think that it really did a disservice to the story. It's like, what happened that fast? And it was creepy. And then, oh, I'm together now because of some misunderstanding, miscommunication. They didn't really do a good job of moving it along. What do you think about that?
I think that to really do this justice, you would have to have 2 episodes, and they weren't going to give 2 episodes to Storm. So if you stitch together this with the 4th episode, you get 1 full episode. Even though this is going back and forth, it's not the hour that you would need to actually do everything in Life Death. I think you get a good amount of time. You got that horror scene in the 4th episode showing them enjoying each other's company. But yeah, I think the romance is rushed a bit. The resolution is rushed a bit. Mm-hmm. She probably could have been without her powers for another episode. But overall, it's good. I think the touchstones that I was talking about that you get when you have a Black gay showrunner is the specifics about colonization that he wove through this story, and also the Charles Xavier story when he's being the teacher. So
right.
It's mentioned when they go into the cave, and he also mentions it's the gladiator as well. But yeah, I think that was also pretty good. And not everyone is going to pick up on that, but I'm glad it was there, especially on rewatch. People appreciate some things on rewatch. So yeah.
And also one other thing about the adversary is that the voice. I think that the same person did the same voice as Storm, so it was this menacing voice. It's awesome. I like that.
I think it's definitely the same actor, and her voice is just tuned up a little bit. So this is the scene in the classroom that I was talking about. But before this, Charles was talking to Gladiator in that room where they have the gods, and apparently art is outlawed by the Share Empire, which is weird. Anyway, they had that one piece of art, and he mentions Roger Kibling.
Yeah, he did the Jungle Book.
Yeah, he did the Jungle Book, but he also wrote White Man's Burden.
Oh, okay.
So you and I both went to Columbia. I specifically studied sustainable development. I'm not sure how much that came up in your curriculum, but yeah. So he mentions it all in an offhanded way. He knows that he wouldn't know who that is. And then Gladiator asks about it, and he says, a man burdened by things that he shouldn't have been, something to that effect. It was better written, and then I just now said it. Or burdened by things only in his mind. So that was a hint, because before he actually full out told them, you're colonizers, he was going to go there in this scene. So,
like I said many times, X-Men is a very good allegory to a lot of real life stuff, and just he keeps doing that. And this is a good scene for me as an educator. I really just love this, but also the '90s decor, the blackboard actually, and the apple, and then the gag where basically gagged Deathbird with the apple is really interesting.
And gave her demerits,
yeah. So it's in some ways it was really traditional teaching. We never do. We can't get away with that now. We cannot like gagging a student. No, we cannot do that.
Yeah. It was also funny that after she got gagged for speaking out of turn, one of the people on the council actually raised their hand before they started talking.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's in that sense, I think that it was a nice scene, but also at the same time, we don't do that stuff anymore in education. So we're not allowed. There would be lawsuits, definitely. But anyways, we switch back over to Storm, and she is still burdened by the adversary and in a very claustrophobic space. And we know that from the comics, she's very claustrophobic, but she was able to overcome her fear to almost rise up like a phoenix and then turn into the original version of Storm with the black costume. And so this is pretty cool. Go ahead, Nathan.
I was going to say, we missed a couple story beats there. So Forge wards off the adversary using some spells that his mother taught him. And you see the runes around his arm, very similar to the runes that show up around Doctor Strange's arm when he's doing magic. So that was an interesting detail that I thought was pretty cool. And when they go to the cavern, specifically because they're trying to find some aloe to put on his wound, they go together, and he says that he wants to go with her. And we find out when they get there, like you said, there's a small space. And her backstory is that she, like you said, is claustrophobic, specifically because her parents were killed when she was a child. And then she was also trapped in the rubble that killed them for days. Very similar to the Wanda Maximoff Pietro story in the MCU. So that's why she has issues with small spaces. So this was definitely a great transformation, and she gets the original look that she had in the comics when she was debuted.
Yeah.
in the 80s. Yeah.
And I remember there was the old Spider-Man cartoons that had the original costume with Storm, and also that one episode X-Men with the Australian accent for Wolverine had this costume as well.
The Pride of X-Men, where Kitty Pryde basically played the Jubilee part. Right. They got one episode, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then we see Xavier's been in the classroom, and this is what I was talking about in the non-spoiler, where there was some alignment with the events of the last episode with the events of this episode, so it was happening at the concurrent time.
Yeah, I think they were happening at the same time, because at the end of her getting her powers, they go back and they talk about going away with each other, and then they turn on the TV. So I think it happened at the same time when she was getting her powers back as Genosha was being attacked. So
yeah,
and when he was teaching the Shi'ar, exactly when Gambit died is when he was teaching.
Yeah, so it went to a point where those Shi'ar leaders, or the significant people that were in that astral plane, were almost convinced by Xavier that you should live a coexistence with them and not try to take away his memories from Earth. This happened, and then it swerved Xavier to a awful state where he needs to say, I need to go back. I can't be in this star-crossed love relationship anymore. And it's like he did a complete 180. And yeah,
because he feels a responsibility to them, right? He not just like any mutants. He feels a responsibility to his X-Men specifically, like a father figure. And I feel like, and it's hard to say this, but it's probably the truth, he probably wouldn't have felt as compelled to go back if one of his didn't die.
Yeah.
And he said specifically when he got the vision, they were dancing and they were drinking and then they were murdered.
Yeah. So probably create a very traumatic experience, and then he's, I need to go back. And that's how we almost left the episode, deciding whether or not he is going to go back. And then where we saw
the tag at the end.
The tag at the end with Bolivar Trask, who was one of the scientists that created Master Mold, was being pursued by some shadowy figure. We find out the shadowy figure was Mr. Sinister. We also find out that he was behind the attack on Genosha. And again,
I don't know that he was.
You don't think he was?
I think that this is not the mastermind. I think this is a piece of the puzzle. If you remember back to the show, and honestly, I didn't remember until a few weeks ago when I rewatched the entire series, there were a lot of team-ups. When they showed up, originally, the bad guys were the main antagonists, but after they had their arc of however many episodes they were tormenting the X-Men, when they showed up again, almost every single time Magneto or Mr. Sinister or Apocalypse showed up, they were teaming up with someone. The last time we saw him, he was teaming up with Apocalypse. He helped with the Phalanx, and then we got a backstory of him in the 1800s about showing his origins. But before that, he was with Apocalypse in the Nexus of Time with his nonsense. I don't think it's going to be Apocalypse. It'll probably be someone else, but I don't think that he's working alone.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he was a piece of a puzzle because of his genetic background, or his background genetics, and specifically he needed to get Trask genetics to activate that thing. He even mentioned that he was a part of it in episode 3. So I think he's a part of it. I don't think he's the main person.
Okay. All right. So I think that there's definitely a lot of questions that come into play, and I know that there's going to be one episode 7, and then there's a 3-parter to end the season. So there's probably going to be a lot of culmination of all these questions, hopefully, that will conclude the first season and maybe bring up some other big comic book storyline that's going to come up. That's what happens in the previous seasons we saw of X-Men, where for season 1, the tag at the end was Sinister coming in from between season 1 and season 2. And then there was a couple of other tags of people that were coming in. So it's probably going to be some type of conclusion, but then there's going to be some new threat that's going to come in. So it's going to be interesting. I think that overall it's been a very great ride overall, but they said there's going to be more surprises and more twists and shocks. Shocks that's going to happen.
After this was a kid's show, and it seems like it's not a kid's show. It's like for people who were kids when the show was after this was a kid's show, I would say they're going to bring Gambit back. I don't think Magneto is dead because we didn't see his body. The next episode, I think, is going to be a Cable episode. And technically, what happened in the original series is that when terrible things like this happen, either Bishop or Cable fixed it with time travel.
Right.
but I don't know if Cable's going to fix it. They might just kill him off. That's what they wanted to do with Morph, by the way. The producers made them bring him back in the second season. They wanted to go hard out the gate and kill Morph and to show that there were consequences, but they were made to pull that back. And maybe now that it's on streaming, they're just going to kill some people off.
Yeah, it's going to be devastating, but I think that it's necessary. Hopefully, you might get to see a variant of Gambit. There might be that type of thing going on.
I would even be okay with that because it may be a variant of Gambit doesn't have the same relationship with Rogue, and then you have you still have the loss, right? They had a relationship, and the variant of Gambit doesn't know Rogue, so maybe it isn't kind of connected to her, so you lose the relationship even though you still have Gambit. Right. I think it's better storytelling, even though I like Gambit, if he stays dead.
Yeah, I agree.
So you have some consequences.
I agree. So. And I think that Magneto, I don't think he's dead. They're going to bring him back somehow because it's two sides of the coin. And you need to have that type of dichotomy, especially in X-Men. So you're probably going to see that again.
It's funny. If they kill off Gambit, then I don't want to... So spoilers for the second season of Invincible. If they actually kill off Gambit, or if they kill off characters in general, they will have been more ballsy than Invincible because they had a bunch of fake out deaths this season, and they reversed them all. So if they actually leave him dead, this Disney show would have been more ballsy than Invincible, which has cursing and killing all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. So that's what we think of X-Men 97, Episode 6. I want to hear what you guys have to think. Please share, subscribe for more content like this, and we will see you in the next video. Talk to you soon.